I'm Commander Elena Vega, 39 years old, and I started my career as an Airman Basic at 18, the lowest rank you can hold. I worked my way up, one stripe, one sleepless night, one mission at a time, until I earned the gold braid on my sleeve. For years, I proved myself quietly leading, training, delivering results, while others with less experience were treated like heroes just for showing up. But when a room full of pilots laughed at me for taking a seat I'd earned, and the Admiral walked in and saluted me first, everything changed. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or humiliated by people who had no idea who they were talking to? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I explain what happened next, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to prove your worth in a room that didn't expect you to have any, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about earning respect the hard way. Because what happened after that salute changed everything. The next morning's briefing started the same as all the others. I arrived early, laid out the materials, reviewed the flight parameters. The pilots filtered in with their coffee and their easy camaraderie, that sense of belonging I'd stopped expecting to feel. Reeves took his usual seat, Wyatt beside him. Holt nodded at me from the front row. Then the door opened and Admiral Greer walked in. The room snapped to attention. Every pilot on their feet, back straight, eyes forward. I stood as well, muscle memory taking over even as my mind raced to understand why he was here. Squadron visits from 08s didn't happen without reason, and Greer hadn't mentioned anything when we'd spoken last week. He surveyed the room with that calm, assessing gaze that missed nothing. Then his eyes landed on me, and he moved forward with deliberate steps. He stopped directly in front of me, raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Permission to begin, Commander Vega," he said. The words hung in the air like a detonation. I returned the salute, my hand steady even as I felt the shift in the room's atmosphere, the sudden recalibration of every assumption these pilots had made about me. "Permission granted, Admiral," I said. Greer took a seat in the back row. The pilots remained standing, uncertainty written across their faces. I saw Reeves's jaw tighten, saw the color drain from Wyatt's cheeks. They'd just watched an 08 salute an 05, watched him defer to my authority in front of everyone. The message was unmistakable. "Be seated," I said. They sat. The room was silent in a way it had never been before, the usual undercurrent of skepticism replaced by something harder to define. Not quite respect, not yet, but at least attention. I ran the briefing exactly as planned. Navigation coordinates, weather considerations, communication protocols. No one interrupted. No one challenged. When I asked for questions, hands stayed down. The pilots took notes, their focus suddenly razor-sharp, as if they'd just realized I might actually know what I was doing. When I dismissed them, they filed out quietly. Greer remained seated until the room emptied, then stood and approached the front table. "That seemed productive," he said. "You didn't need to do that, sir." "Do what?" "Attend a routine operational briefing." His expression was neutral, but I knew him well enough to see the calculated intent behind it. I wanted to see how the squadron was adjusting to its new command structure. They were adjusting fine. Were they? He picked up one of the navigation charts, studied it briefly. "I heard about the simulation last week. About Lieutenant Reeves's creative interpretation of your orders." Of course he'd heard. Greer heard everything. The mission objective was achieved. At the cost of unit cohesion. He set down the chart and met my eyes. "You know what your problem is, Vega? You're still acting like you need their approval. You don't. You have the rank. You have the authority. You have my backing. Start using it." I can't lead through intimidation. I'm not asking you to intimidate anyone. I'm asking you to lead. There's a difference. He moved toward the door, then paused. "They're testing you because they think they can. Show them they can't." After he left, I stood alone in the briefing room again, looking at the empty chairs, the scattered notepads, the coffee rings on the table. Greer's intervention had shifted the dynamic, but it hadn't solved the underlying problem. The pilots hadn't suddenly developed respect for me. They'd just been reminded that someone they did respect backed my authority. It wasn't the same thing. That afternoon, I reviewed personnel files in my office. Reeves had an exemplary record, top of his class at flight school, multiple commendations, consistently high marks on operational evaluations. Wyatt was similar, younger, but equally skilled. These weren't mediocre pilots looking for excuses. They were good at their jobs, and they knew it, which made their resistance harder to dismiss. If they were incompetent, I could simply replace them. But they weren't. They were exactly the kind of pilots I needed, which meant I had to find a way to lead them that didn't rely on Greer's presence in the room. Chief Petty Officer Briggs knocked on my doorframe. "Got a minute, Commander?" "Come in, Chief." Briggs was 35, enlisted for 17 years, and one of the most competent crew chiefs I'd ever worked with. He also had that particular wisdom that came from watching officers come and go while he stayed constant. "Wanted to check in on the maintenance schedule," he said, setting down a tablet. "But also wanted to say, that thing this morning with the Admiral. That was something. It was unnecessary." "Was it?" Briggs leaned against the doorframe. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but those pilots have been treating you like a substitute teacher. Sometimes the principal needs to show up and remind everyone who's actually in charge." "I shouldn't need the principal." "Maybe not. But you're also dealing with a boys' club that's been running unopposed for decades. Change doesn't happen because you ask nicely. It happens because someone with enough weight makes it happen." He tapped the tablet. "The enlisted crew respects you. We've seen what you can do. But officers, especially pilots, they've got their heads too far up their own tailpipes to notice anything that doesn't stroke their ego. So what do I do about it?" "You stop trying to make them comfortable," Briggs said. "Stop smoothing the edges. You're the commander. Act like it. If they don't like it, that's their problem." It was almost exactly what Greer had said, what he'd been telling me for years. But hearing it from Briggs, from someone who existed outside the officer hierarchy, made it land differently. "The maintenance schedule looks fine," I said, glancing at the tablet. "Anything else?" "Just one thing." Briggs straightened. "You're a good officer, Commander. Don't let them convince you otherwise." He left before I could respond. I sat there thinking about what he'd said, about the pattern I'd fallen into. Trying to earn acceptance instead of demanding performance. Seeking validation instead of enforcing standards. I'd spent 21 years believing that if I was just good enough, worked hard enough, proved myself thoroughly enough, the resistance would fade. But it hadn't. It had just adapted, finding new ways to undermine authority that didn't look like insubordination on paper. Reeves's comment during the simulation, "decorative authority," kept echoing in my mind. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it revealed how he saw this. My promotion wasn't a recognition of competence. It was a political gesture, a quota filled, a box checked. And as long as he believed that, as long as any of them believed that, my actual qualifications didn't matter. I pulled up the squadron's training schedule on my computer. We had another major exercise in 2 weeks, a complex multi-phase operation that would test every pilot's capabilities. It was also an opportunity. I began making notes, sketching out a new approach to the exercise. More demanding parameters, tighter coordination requirements, less room for individual heroics. The kind of mission that required trust in your commander's tactical decisions, because there wasn't time to second-guess them. If they wanted to test me, fine. I'd test them right back. By the time I left the office that evening, I had a complete operational plan. It was aggressive, challenging, and left no space for the kind of freelancing Reeves had pulled during the simulation. Every pilot would have to execute exactly as briefed, or the entire mission would fail. Walking back to my quarters, I passed a group of enlisted airmen running evening PT. They called out greetings, "Evening, Commander, ma'am," with genuine respect in their voices. The enlisted never questioned my authority. They saw the rank and accepted it, because that's how the system worked for them. But officers, especially pilots, operated in a different culture. One where authority had to be performed, demonstrated, proven again and again. Where rank alone wasn't enough if you didn't fit their image of what a commander should look like. I'd been trying to fit that image. Trying to lead the way they expected, to communicate in their language, to make my authority palatable. But Greer was right. Briggs was right. I didn't need their comfort. I needed their competence. The next briefing was in 2 days. Between now and then, I'd finalize the exercise parameters and prepare to enforce them without compromise. No more explaining myself. No more justifying tactical decisions to lieutenants who thought they knew better. I was the commander. It was time to act like it. The briefing room felt different 2 days later. Or maybe I was different. I arrived at the usual time, but instead of carefully arranging materials and rehearsing explanations, I simply set down the folder and waited. The pilots filed in. The usual banter died as they noticed something had shifted. Maybe it was my posture or the way I didn't soften my expression when they entered. Maybe it was the memory of Admiral Greer's salute still hanging in the air. "Seats," I said when the last one entered. They sat immediately. I opened the folder and began without preamble. The exercise in 2 weeks will test full-spectrum operational capability under compressed timelines. You'll be executing a coordinated strike with multiple objectives, degraded communications, and simulated casualties. The margin for error is 0. I pulled up the tactical display. Each phase depends on the previous phase completing on schedule. If one element fails, the entire mission fails. There is no room for improvisation. No room for creative interpretation. You will execute exactly as briefed or you will fail. Reeves raised his hand. I didn't acknowledge it. Flight assignments are posted outside. Study your individual roles. Memorize your coordinates. Understand your backup protocols. I expect every pilot to brief back their specific responsibilities tomorrow morning at 0700. If you cannot articulate your role clearly, you will be removed from the exercise. "Commander," Reeves started. "I didn't call on you, Lieutenant." The room went still. Reeves's hand lowered slowly. "This is not a training exercise where we celebrate partial success," I continued. "This is an evaluation of whether this squadron can function as a unit under pressure. Your individual skill doesn't matter if you can't operate as part of a team. Your tactical instincts don't matter if you can't follow mission parameters." I made eye contact with each pilot in turn. "Some of you have been treating this squadron like a democracy where orders are suggestions open to debate. That ends now. I don't need your agreement. I need your execution." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. Holt sat very still, her expression carefully neutral. "Questions about the mission objectives will be addressed in individual briefings. Questions about my authority won't be addressed at all. Clear?" A chorus of "Yes, ma'am" followed. Dismissed. They filed out in silence. No lingering conversations, no smirking exchanges. Holt paused at the door. "That was overdue," I said. "I know." After she left, Captain Mills appeared. He'd been standing in the hallway, I realized, listening. "Commander, can we talk?" "If this is about softening my approach, it's not." He closed the door. "I wanted to apologize. I told you to be patient, to let things settle. That was wrong. You don't have time for patience. These pilots needed a clear command structure, and I should have backed you in establishing it from the start." I studied him, looking for the political calculation behind his words. But his expression was genuine. "Thank you, sir." "For what it's worth," Mills said, "I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of commanders come through. Most of them lead through consensus, trying to be everyone's friend. The good ones lead through clarity. You just showed this squadron what clear leadership looks like. We'll see if it works." "It will." He moved to the door, then paused. "But be prepared for pushback. Reeves isn't going to take this quietly." He was right. That afternoon, I received a formal request from Reeves to discuss his flight assignment. The language was professional, but the intent was clear. He wanted to argue for a different role, one with more autonomy. I denied the request in writing. "All assignments are final. Focus on preparation." An hour later, Wyatt submitted a similar request. I gave the same response. By evening, 3 more requests had come in. Each one professionally worded, each one fundamentally challenging my decisions. They were testing the new boundary, probing to see if I'd hold the line. I denied every request without explanation. The next morning's briefback was revealing. I called on Wyatt first. He stood, cleared his throat, and began articulating his role in the exercise. He stumbled twice, mixing up coordinates, and I stopped him. "Insufficient preparation. You're removed from the exercise pending remedial briefing." His face went red. "Commander, I can sit down, Lieutenant." I called on the next pilot. She delivered a flawless brief back, every detail precise. I nodded. Approved. One by one, the pilots stood and demonstrated their understanding. 2 more failed to meet the standard and were removed. When I called on Reeves, he stood with that familiar confidence and delivered a perfect brief back. Every coordinate, every protocol, every backup procedure. Approved, I said. He sat down, and I saw something in his expression I hadn't seen before: respect. Not liking, not friendship, but professional respect for standards equally applied. The 3 removed pilots would get their remedial briefings this afternoon. They'd study harder, prepare better, and they'd be reinstated once they demonstrated competence. But the message had been sent: rank and talent didn't exempt you from accountability. After the briefing, Chief Briggs caught me in the hallway. "Heard you pulled 3 pilots from the exercise. They weren't ready, including Wyatt. That took guts." He grinned. "The crew's talking about it. They're saying maybe this squadron has a real commander now. We'll see how the exercise goes." "We will," Briggs agreed. "But I'll tell you something, those pilots are talking too. And they're not laughing anymore." That night, I reviewed the exercise parameters one final time. It was demanding, perhaps more so than necessary, but that was the point. I needed to see how they performed under pressure, how they functioned when there was no room for individual glory, only coordinated execution. I also needed to see how I performed as their commander. Not the commander who explained and justified and sought approval, but the one who set standards and enforced them. The one who led. The files on my desk included a note from Admiral Greer, handwritten: "Stop trying to make them comfortable. Make them competent." I'd been reading those words wrong for years. I thought they meant I should focus on training, on improving their skills. But that wasn't it. Making them competent meant requiring competence, demanding it, accepting nothing less. It meant expecting them to meet my standards instead of lowering my standards to meet their comfort. The 3 removed pilots completed their remedial briefings the next day. All 3 passed. Wyatt approached me afterward, standing at attention. "Commander, I want to apologize. I wasn't prepared, and that was unprofessional." "Apology noted," I said. "Don't let it happen again." "It won't, ma'am." He meant it. I could see it in his posture, hear it in his voice. The easy arrogance had been replaced by something more useful: awareness that actions had consequences. The exercise was 12 days away. 12 days to refine coordination, drill procedures, build the muscle memory that would make this squadron function as a unit. 12 days to prove that clear standards and consistent enforcement could transform resentment into performance. I'd spent 21 years waiting for acceptance. I was done waiting. The days before the exercise blurred into a rhythm of briefings, flight drills, and tactical reviews. I pushed the squadron hard, demanding precision in every phase of preparation. No shortcuts, no excuses, no tolerance for half measures. The pilots responded. Not with enthusiasm. This wasn't about winning hearts, but with focused effort. Flight simulations showed improving coordination. Communication protocols tightened. Even Reeves stopped looking for opportunities to challenge and started asking substantive questions about target sequencing and defensive positioning. Holt pulled me aside after a particularly grueling simulation. "They're coming around," she said. "You're seeing it, right?" "I'm seeing them do their jobs," I said. "That's not the same as coming around." Maybe it's enough. Maybe it was. But I'd learned not to mistake compliance for respect, performance for acceptance. The pilots were executing because the standards were clear and the consequences for failing them were immediate. That was progress. Whether it would last beyond this exercise remained to be seen. 3 days before the operation, Captain Mills called me to his office. "I reviewed the exercise parameters," he said. "They're aggressive. They're appropriate for the squadron's capability level." "I'm not questioning that." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm questioning whether you've left yourself enough margin for error. If something goes wrong, then we'll adapt. That's what operational flexibility is for." "There's a difference between flexibility and room to fail gracefully," Mills said. "You've designed this to be pass-fail with no middle ground. If they struggle, there's nowhere to land softly." "Good," I said. Soft landings teach bad habits. They need to understand that mission success requires everyone performing at the standard, not just most of the time, but every time. Mills studied me for a long moment. You've changed. A month ago, you would have hedged, built in contingencies to protect them from the consequences of their mistakes. A month ago, I was trying to be the commander they'd accept. Now I'm just being the commander they need. He nodded slowly. Admiral Greer would approve. I hope the same could be said of you, sir. You have my support, Mills said. But understand, if this goes wrong, the responsibility falls on you. Not them. You. I'm aware. Because that was the weight of command. Not just the authority to give orders, but the accountability for outcomes. I'd watched other officers try to diffuse that responsibility, to spread blame across the unit when things failed. But leadership meant owning the results, both success and failure. The exercise began at 0600 on a Thursday morning that started cold and clear. I watched from the control center as the pilots ran through pre-flight checks, their movements efficient and practiced. Chief Briggs supervised the ground crew, his voice carrying across the flight line with calm authority. All aircraft ready, Commander, he reported over the comm. Copy that, Chief. Flight leads check in. One by one, the pilots confirmed their status. Reeves leading Alpha Flight, Holt leading Bravo, a lieutenant commander named Torres leading Charlie. 3 elements, 9 aircraft total, executing a coordinated strike against multiple objectives under compressed timelines. Execute Phase 1, I ordered. The aircraft launched in sequence, their departure choreographed to the second. I watched their positions on the tactical display, tracking vectors and spacing, monitoring communication discipline. So far, everything was proceeding exactly as briefed. Phase 1 required low-level penetration through simulated air defense coverage. The pilots maintained formation, adjusting for terrain without breaking spacing. Holt's voice came through the comm calling out a slight course correction, and her element adjusted smoothly. Phase 1 complete, Torres reported. Alpha and Bravo elements in position for Phase 2. Phase 2 was the hard part. Simultaneous strikes on 3 separate objectives, requiring precise timing and coordination. If anyone deviated from the flight plan, the entire sequence collapsed. Execute Phase 2, I said. The aircraft separated, each element moving to its assigned target. I watched the clock, counting down to the planned strike time. 15 seconds. 10. 5. Alpha Flight, target acquired, Reeves called. Engaging. Bravo Flight, target acquired, Holt followed. Engaging. Charlie Flight, Torres's voice cut off. Charlie Flight, report, I said. Static. Then, Charlie 3 has simulated engine failure. Breaking off. My hand tightened on the console. This was the contingency I'd planned for but hoped wouldn't occur. Charlie 3 failing meant Torres had to adjust his attack run with only 2 aircraft, which meant the timing for the entire phase was compromised. Charlie lead, continue with remaining elements, I ordered. Alpha and Bravo, maintain schedule. Copy, Commander, Torres said. Adjusting. The display showed Charlie's revised approach. Torres was compensating well, repositioning his wingman to cover the failed aircraft's role. But the clock was unforgiving. If he missed the window, Phase 3 couldn't begin on time. Charlie Flight, target acquired, Torres called. Engaging. He was 4 seconds late. Not catastrophic, but enough to compress the timeline for Phase 3. All elements, Phase 2 complete, I said. Proceed to Phase 3. Phase 3 required the aircraft to regroup and conduct a coordinated egress through the same air defense network they'd penetrated earlier. The simulation would test their ability to maintain cohesion under pressure, to adapt to the compressed timeline without breaking apart. Alpha lead, we're tight on spacing, Reeves reported. Request permission to adjust egress route. This was the test. The moment where a pilot's instinct to improvise ran up against mission discipline. The old me would have explained why the route was necessary, would have justified the decision. The current me just enforced it. Negative, Alpha lead. Maintain briefed route. Brief pause. Then, copy, Commander. The aircraft threaded back through the simulated defenses, their formation tight but controlled. Holt called out adjustments. Torres covered his wounded element, and Reeves held his spacing despite the compressed timeline. Slowly, deliberately, they executed exactly as briefed. All elements clear of defensive envelope, Torres reported. Phase 3 complete. Exercise complete, I said. Return to base. The pilots landed in sequence, their aircraft touching down with practiced precision. I watched from the control center as they taxied to their positions, as the ground crew swarmed around them, as Chief Briggs supervised the shutdown procedures. We'd done it. Not flawlessly, Charlie 3's simulated failure had created complications, but successfully. The squadron had functioned as a unit, had adapted to adversity without abandoning the mission framework. They'd proven they could execute under pressure. More importantly, they'd proven I could lead them. The debrief was scheduled for 1400 hours. I spent the intervening time reviewing the flight data, analyzing communication logs, identifying both strengths and areas for improvement. The results would be shared without sugarcoating, without false praise. They'd performed well. They needed to understand why and where they could be better. When I entered the debrief room, the pilots were already seated. No casual banter this time, no smirking exchanges. They sat at attention, notepads ready, waiting. I started with the successes. Precise execution of Phase 1. Effective communication discipline. Strong coordination under compressed timelines. Then I addressed the challenges. Torres's decision-making during Charlie 3's failure was sound, but his repositioning had been slightly too aggressive, creating brief spacing issues with Bravo flight. Reeves's request to adjust the egress route showed good tactical awareness, but also revealed lingering instinct to freelance. Overall, I concluded, this squadron performed at the standard expected of an operational unit. You functioned as a team. You adapted to adversity. You completed the mission. I closed the folder. Questions? Reeves raised his hand. I nodded. Commander, when I requested the route adjustment, I understand why you denied it. I'm not questioning that. I just want to understand the tactical reasoning behind maintaining the original egress path despite the time compression. It was a genuine question. Not a challenge, not a test, but an actual request for information. I pulled up the tactical display and highlighted the egress route. The route was designed with multiple decision points that allow for timing variations up to 8 seconds without compromising defensive positioning. When Charlie 3 failed, we lost 4 seconds in Phase 2, which put us at the upper edge of that tolerance. Changing the route would have required all 3 elements to adjust simultaneously under pressure. The risk of spacing errors or communication breakdown exceeded the benefit of recovering those 4 seconds. Reeves nodded, studying the display. So maintaining the briefed route was actually the more flexible option because everyone already knew it. Exactly. Flexibility isn't always about changing plans. Sometimes it's about having plans robust enough to absorb variation. Other hands went up. Wyatt asked about communication protocols. Holt questioned the defensive positioning during Phase 3. Torres wanted clarification on the threshold for aborting versus adapting when an element failed. Each question was substantive, professional, focused on understanding rather than challenging. We spent 90 minutes in that debrief, dissecting every phase of the exercise, examining decisions and outcomes. The pilots took notes, asked follow-up questions, engaged with the material in a way they hadn't before. This wasn't compliance. This was actual learning. When the session ended, I dismissed them with one final note. Next exercise is in 3 weeks. We'll build on what we accomplished today. Expect it to be harder. Groans followed, but they were good-natured. The kind of complaint that acknowledged difficulty while accepting the challenge. As the room emptied, Torres approached. Commander, I wanted to say, that call you made on the egress route. In the moment, I questioned it. But you were right. Changing it would have created more problems than it solved. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. Also, he continued, I've been flying for 12 years. I've served under a lot of commanders. Most of them would have blamed me for the timing issue after Charlie 3 failed. You didn't. You just worked the problem. He paused. That's the kind of leadership that makes people want to follow you. He left before I could respond. I stood there thinking about his words, about the distinction he'd drawn. Leadership that demanded performance versus leadership that assigned blame. I'd spent so much energy trying to prove I deserved authority that I'd forgotten the simplest truth. Authority wasn't about deserving. It was about using it effectively. Chief Briggs found me in my office that evening. Heard the exercise went well. It did. Heard the debrief went even better. He set down a maintenance report. The enlisted crew's been watching, Commander. Watching how you handle the pilots, how you run operations. There's been a shift. What kind of shift? The kind where people stop waiting for you to fail and start expecting you to succeed. It's subtle, but it's there. He tapped the report. Also, Lieutenant Reeves asked me about your flight record today. Wanted to know how many combat hours you logged, what kind of missions you flew. He seemed surprised by the answer. He could have asked me directly. Sure. But asking me meant he could learn without admitting he didn't already know. Pride's a funny thing. Briggs smiled. Anyway, thought you'd want to know. The questions are changing. That means the attitudes are changing. After he left, I sat at my desk thinking about what came next. The exercise had proven the squadron could function under my command, but one successful operation didn't transform culture. It was a data point, not a conclusion. The real test would be sustaining this performance, maintaining these standards over time. I pulled up the training schedule and began planning the next phase. More complex scenarios, higher stakes, less margin for error. If the pilots responded well to clear expectations and consistent accountability, then I'd continue raising the bar. If they reverted to old patterns, I'd address it immediately. But I wouldn't go back to seeking their approval. That chapter was done. Admiral Greer called the next morning. Heard about your exercise. Mills gave me the after-action report. And he said it was some of the cleanest tactical execution he's seen from that squadron in 2 years. He also said you handled the simulated casualty without flinching, kept the entire operation on track. Greer paused. I told you that you knew how to lead, Vega. You just needed to stop apologizing for it. I'm not sure I've stopped apologizing, sir. I've just stopped waiting for permission. That's the same thing. His voice carried satisfaction. The promotion was always yours on merit. But merit without confidence is just potential. You're finally showing them what you've always been capable of. The pilots still don't trust me completely. Trust takes time. Respect is faster. You've got their respect now. The trust will follow. And if it doesn't? Then you'll have a functional squadron that operates professionally under your command. That's the job, Elena. You're not their friend. You're their commander. He was right, but part of me still wanted more. Wanted the camaraderie I saw between the male officers, the easy belonging that came without effort. But wanting it didn't make it possible, and trying to force it only undermined the authority I'd fought to establish. Better to be a respected commander than a popular one. Better to lead effectively than to be liked. The following week brought routine operations, training flights, maintenance reviews, administrative work. The pilots executed with consistent professionalism. Reeves stopped looking for opportunities to challenge. Wyatt arrived at briefings fully prepared. Even the informal dynamic shifted. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms not out of fear, but out of acknowledgement that the commander had arrived. Small changes, but meaningful ones. Holt and I were reviewing flight schedules when she said, "You know, I think this is going to work." "What is?" "This. The squadron. Your command." She gestured at the schedule. "A month ago, I wasn't sure. The resistance was strong, and I didn't know if you could break through it. But you did." "I haven't broken through anything. I just stopped trying to." "That's what I mean," Holt said. "You stopped trying to make them accept you and started making them perform. And performance is the only thing that actually matters. Tell that to the people who still think my promotion was political. Some people will always think that. But fewer than before." She met my eyes. "You've won over the ones who are capable of changing their minds. The others, let them stay bitter. They'll either adapt or transfer out." It was a pragmatic view, and probably accurate. Not everyone would come around. Some would remain resentful, convinced that my authority was illegitimate regardless of how effectively I wielded it. But I couldn't lead for them. I had to lead for the mission, for the squadron, for the standards that kept everyone alive. That evening, I ran my usual route around the base perimeter. 5 miles, same path I'd been running for years. As I rounded the flight line, I saw a group of pilots finishing their own PT session. Wyatt waved. Torres called out, "Evening, Commander." Simple gestures, but they marked a shift. I was no longer an outsider in their space. I was their commander, and they acknowledged it naturally, without the performance of respect that came from obligation rather than recognition. I finished my run and headed back to quarters, thinking about Admiral Greer's words. Trust takes time. Respect is faster. The pilots respected my authority now. Whether they trusted my judgment, my leadership, my right to hold this rank, that remained to be seen. But I had time, and I had their performance. The rest would either come or it wouldn't. Either way, the mission would continue. The squadron would function. I would lead. Because that's what commanders did. They led. With or without approval, with or without friendship, with or without the easy acceptance that came naturally to others. They set standards, enforced them, and moved forward. I'd spent 21 years trying to earn something that couldn't be earned. Now I was simply taking what had always been mine, the authority to command, the responsibility to lead, the right to expect excellence. It was enough. It had to be. The next major operation came 3 weeks later, a joint air-sea exercise involving coordination with naval assets and multiple squadrons. The complexity level was significantly higher than anything we'd attempted before, and the margin for error was correspondingly smaller. I spent days preparing the tactical briefings, coordinating with the other commanders, ensuring every element understood their role in the larger picture. The morning briefing included not just my squadron but representatives from 2 others plus naval liaison officers. The room was crowded, energy high with the competitive tension that came when multiple units operated together. I laid out the operational framework, assigned sectors, established communication protocols. Commander Vaughn from Squadron 12 was there, another 05, another woman, someone I'd crossed paths with over the years but never worked with directly. She caught my eye during the briefing and nodded, a gesture of solidarity that needed no words. When I asked for questions, a lieutenant commander from Squadron 8 raised his hand. "Commander Vega, the timing on Phase 2 seems tight. Have you built in contingencies for weather delays?" "Weather contingencies are outlined in Appendix C," I said. "Each phase has a 12-minute window that allows for minor delays without cascading effects. If we exceed that window, we shift to alternate timeline Bravo. What if Bravo's not viable? Then we abort and reschedule. Mission success requires all elements. We don't execute partial operations." The lieutenant commander nodded, satisfied. Around the room, I saw other officers reviewing their materials, checking the appendices, verifying their understanding. No one questioned my authority to make these decisions. They were too busy absorbing the information they needed to execute their roles. The operation launched at dawn. I coordinated from the control center alongside the naval commander, a captain named Morrison who had 3 decades of experience and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen everything. We monitored the tactical displays as aircraft and ships maneuvered into position, as communication networks synced, as the massive coordination machinery of joint operations ground into motion. "Your squadron's looking sharp, Commander," Morrison said, watching my aircraft maintain formation through the initial approach. "Clean spacing, good communication discipline." "Thank you, sir. First time running an operation this large. First time as primary air coordinator, yes." He smiled slightly. "You're doing fine. Just remember, in joint ops, something always goes wrong. The key is not preventing problems, but managing them when they surface." He was right. 20 minutes into Phase 1, one of Squadron 8's aircraft developed a hydraulic issue and had to return to base. The loss disrupted their formation, which meant their attack timeline needed adjustment, which affected the naval component's positioning. I pulled up the alternate timelines, ran through the options. Squadron 8, shift to formation Bravo 2. Naval elements, delay ingress by 4 minutes. All other units maintain schedule. "Copy, Commander," came the responses. The adjustments rippled through the operation, but the framework held. Because I'd planned for disruptions, built flexibility into the structure, anticipated that perfection was impossible and adaptation was mandatory. The pilots and naval crews executed the changes smoothly, their training and preparation showing in how quickly they responded. Phase 2 required coordinated strikes from air and sea assets against multiple objectives. The timing had to be precise. Naval bombardment would suppress defenses, allowing the aircraft to penetrate and engage targets before the defenders could reposition. If either element missed their window, the other would be exposed to unacceptable risk. Naval elements, report ready status, Morrison said. Surface group ready. Air elements, report ready status, I said. One by one, the squadron leaders confirmed. My squadron last. Squadron 7 ready, Commander. That was Reeves's voice. Steady, professional, no trace of the arrogance that had defined our early interactions. He was flying Alpha Lead today, carrying significant responsibility in a high-visibility operation. And he sounded ready. Execute Phase 2, I ordered. The coordination was beautiful in its complexity. Naval guns opened fire, their shells arcing over the horizon toward designated targets. Aircraft swept in from multiple vectors, their attack runs timed to coincide with the bombardment lifting. Communication chatter filled the networks, distance calls, target confirmations, breakaway notifications, all of it controlled, professional, exactly as briefed. Squadron 7, all targets engaged, Reeves reported. Breaking off, no casualties. Squadron 8, targets engaged, aggressing now. Squadron 12, targets engaged, one simulated surface-to-air hit on Bravo 3. Aircraft returning to base. One casualty across 3 squadrons executing simultaneous strikes under compressed timelines. That was acceptable. Morrison caught my eye and nodded approval. Phase 3 was the egress, the careful choreography of extracting forces from contested space without exposing them to follow-on attacks. I coordinated the withdrawal, staging aircraft exits to maintain defensive coverage while naval assets provided fire support. It took 40 minutes to pull everyone out cleanly, 40 minutes of constant communication and adjustment. All elements clear, Morrison finally announced. Exercise complete. The control center erupted in quiet satisfaction. No cheering, no celebration, just the professional acknowledgement that we'd executed a complex operation successfully. I reviewed the displays one final time, confirming all aircraft had returned safely, all objectives had been met, all coordination points had functioned as designed. Commander Vega, Morrison said, extending his hand. That was excellent work. Your air coordination was exactly what this operation needed. Thank you, sir. Your naval elements made it possible. Partnership, he said. That's what joint operations require. You've got a good understanding of that. The debrief that afternoon included all participating units. We reviewed each phase, analyzed the decisions made, identified lessons learned. The tone was collegial but rigorous, professional officers examining performance without ego or defensiveness. When my turn came to address Squadron 7's execution, I was honest about both strengths and weaknesses. The formation discipline had been excellent. Communication had been clear and timely. The adaptation to Squadron 8's aircraft loss had been smooth. But there had been a brief spacing issue during Phase 2 egress that could have created problems in actual combat. Lieutenant Reeves, I said, your attack run was flawless, but your breakaway put you within 100 meters of Squadron 12's Charlie element. That's too close. In combat, that proximity could compromise both aircraft. Reeves nodded. Understood, Commander. I was focused on target egress and didn't track Charlie's position closely enough. I'll adjust for next time. Good. I moved on to the next point. After the debrief, Commander Vaughn approached me. You've got a tight squadron, Elena. I saw them training a few weeks ago, and the improvement is dramatic. They're good pilots. They just needed clear direction. They needed good leadership, Vaughn corrected. There's a difference. Plenty of squadrons have clear direction and still underperform. Yours doesn't because you've built something functional. We walked together across the flight line, 205s discussing the challenges of command in an environment that still treated women officers as novelties. Vaughn had her own stories, different details, same underlying dynamics. The constant need to prove competence. The way mistakes were magnified while successes were minimized. The exhausting awareness that you represented not just yourself, but every woman who might follow. Does it get easier? I asked. No, she said bluntly. But you get stronger. And eventually, you stop caring whether it's fair. You just focus on the mission. The weeks following the joint exercise settled into operational rhythm. Training continued, missions executed, the squadron functioned with increasing cohesion. The pilots had stopped questioning my tactical decisions and started simply implementing them. Trust was building, slowly but steadily, in the way that only consistent performance could create. Reeves approached me one afternoon as I reviewed maintenance logs in the hangar. He stood at attention until I acknowledged him. At ease, Lieutenant. What do you need? Commander, I wanted to, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I owe you an apology. When you first took command, I didn't treat you with the respect the position deserved. That was wrong. I set down the maintenance log and looked at him directly. Why are you telling me this now? Because I was wrong, he said simply. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on factors that had nothing to do with your actual competence. The past few months have shown me that you're exactly the commander this squadron needs. I should have recognized that from the beginning. It would have been easy to accept the apology and move on. But there was a conversation here that needed to happen, one that went beyond personal redemption. What changed? I asked. What made you realize you were wrong? Reeves considered the question. Honestly, the joint exercise. Watching you coordinate 3 squadrons and naval assets, managing that complexity without losing control of the details, that's not something every commander can do. Most would have delegated more, tried to spread the responsibility. You owned it. And when things went wrong, you adjusted without panic or blame. That's leadership. So you needed to see me perform at a high level before you'd respect the rank I'd already earned. He flinched slightly. Yes, ma'am. And I understand how that sounds. It sounds like you evaluated me differently than you'd evaluate a male commander in the same position. A male O5 taking over the squadron would have received the benefit of the doubt. I had to prove myself first. You're right, Reeves said. That's exactly what happened. And I'm sorry for it. The apology was genuine. I could see it in his expression, hear it in his voice. But the pattern he described wasn't unique to him. It was systemic, built into the culture in ways both obvious and subtle. I appreciate the apology, I said. But understand this, Lieutenant. I can't spend my career proving myself to every pilot who decides I need to earn what's already mine. The rank comes first. The respect should follow. When that order gets reversed, it creates a command climate where authority is constantly negotiable. I understand that now. Do you? Because next year, there might be another woman promoted to commander. And she shouldn't have to prove herself the way I did. She should be able to walk into that first briefing and receive the same professional respect any other O5 receives. That's the standard. Reeves nodded slowly. You're right. And for what it's worth, if that happens, I'll be better. See that you are. I picked up the maintenance log again. Was there anything else? No, ma'am. Thank you for your time. He left. I stood there thinking about the conversation, about what it meant and what it didn't. Reeves's individual evolution was positive, but individual changes didn't transform institutional culture. The next woman commander would face similar challenges unless the system itself changed, unless the default assumption became competence rather than suspicion. That evening, I met with Admiral Greer in his office. He'd requested the meeting without explaining why, which usually meant he had something significant to discuss. Commander Vega, he said, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss your performance review. Every officer's stomach tightened at those words. Performance reviews determined promotion potential, assignment opportunities, career trajectory. I sat down and waited. Your review is excellent, Greer said. Top marks across all categories. The joint exercise was particularly noted. The coordination and execution were exemplary. Captain Morrison specifically requested that you be considered for future joint operations. Relief flooded through me, carefully controlled. Thank you, sir. There's more, Greer continued. You're being considered for selection to O6. Colonel, if you're Army or Air Force. Captain, if you're Navy. He smiled slightly. The promotion board meets in 6 months. Based on your record, you're a strong candidate. O6. Captain. The rank I'd watched others achieve, had wondered if I'd ever reach. The rank that represented not just advancement, but validation that the system recognized sustained excellence. I don't know what to say, sir. Say you'll keep doing what you're doing, Greer said. The squadron's performance speaks for itself. Your leadership has transformed their operational capability. That's what the board will see. And what they'll also see is that I'm a woman, I said. That still matters. It shouldn't. But it does. Greer leaned back in his chair. Elena, I won't lie to you. Yes, your gender will be a factor. Some board members will view it positively, evidence of diversity and inclusion. Others will view it skeptically, concerns about quotas and standards. But the majority will view it the way they should, as irrelevant compared to your actual performance. And if the skeptics outnumber the others, then you won't make O6 this cycle and we'll try again next year. But I don't think that's what will happen. Your record is too strong. The documentation is too clear. You've earned this. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that merit would prevail, that the evaluations would be fair, that the system worked the way it was supposed to. But 21 years in uniform had taught me that supposed to, and actually does, were often different things. What do I need to do between now and the board? I asked. Keep leading. Keep delivering results. Document everything, every successful operation, every training improvement, every example of effective command. Build the record so strong that questioning it becomes absurd. I left his office with equal parts hope and apprehension. The possibility of O6 was real, tangible, close enough to imagine. But so were the obstacles. The biases that might discount my achievements. The assumptions that might minimize my contributions. The systemic resistance to women in senior leadership. Chief Briggs found me on the flight line later that evening. You look contemplative, Commander. Just thinking about the future. Anything specific? Promotion boards. Career progression. Whether the system actually rewards merit or just says it does. Briggs smiled. You're thinking about making O6. How did you know? Because everyone starts thinking about it around this point in their career. And because you've got the record to justify it. He gestured at the aircraft lined up on the flight line. You've turned this squadron around. The pilots respect you. The enlisted crew respects you. You've proven you can lead at this level. The next level is just more of the same, but with bigger stakes. And if the board doesn't see it that way, then the board's wrong, Briggs said simply. But I don't think they will be. You've done everything right, Commander. Sometimes that's actually enough. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that doing everything right would be sufficient. But I'd seen too many qualified officers passed over, too many talented leaders plateau because they didn't fit the expected profile. Being right wasn't always enough when the system valued conformity over competence. Still, I had 6 months. 6 months to continue building the record, to demonstrate sustained excellence, to make the case for promotion so compelling that overlooking it would be inexcusable. The work continued. Training exercises, operational missions, administrative responsibilities. I led the squadron through increasingly complex scenarios, each one designed to test their capabilities and mine. The pilots responded with consistent professionalism, their performance improving as trust deepened. Lieutenant Wyatt had evolved from skeptical observer to reliable element leader. Holt had become a genuine ally, someone I could trust to execute complex tasks without supervision. Even Reeves had transformed into a solid officer whose tactical judgment I respected. For months before the promotion board, we received orders for a major deployment. 6 weeks overseas, embedded with Allied forces, conducting training operations and joint exercises. It was the kind of assignment that tested everything: logistics, coordination, leadership under sustained pressure. It was also the kind of assignment that could make or break a promotion package. The squadron deployed with precision. Aircraft transported, equipment staged, personnel billeted, all within the compressed timeline that made peacetime feel almost like combat. I'd supervised dozens of deployments over my career, but this was different. This was my squadron, my responsibility, my leadership being evaluated under the most demanding circumstances. The first week overseas was adjustment, adapting to new facilities, coordinating with allied partners, establishing operational rhythms in an unfamiliar environment. The pilots handled it well, their professionalism evident in how quickly they integrated with the host nation's forces. We were conducting joint exercises with their Air Force, flying coordinated missions that required real-time adaptation to different communication protocols and tactical approaches. The complexity was significant, but so was the opportunity to demonstrate capability. 2 weeks into deployment, we executed a large-scale exercise involving multiple nations. I coordinated the air component, managing aircraft from 4 different countries, each with their own procedures and priorities. The communication challenges were immense: language barriers, technical incompatibilities, cultural differences in how orders were interpreted and executed. But the squadron performed beautifully. They adapted to the chaos, maintained professionalism, executed their roles with precision. When complications arose, and they always did, my pilots responded with flexibility and confidence. They made me look good because they were good, and I'd trained them to be better. The Allied commander, a colonel from the host nation, approached me after the exercise. "Commander Vega, your squadron is exceptional. The discipline, the coordination, the adaptability, this is exactly what multinational operations require." "Thank you, sir. They're excellent pilots." "They're well-led pilots," he corrected. "There is a difference. I have seen talented pilots perform poorly under weak leadership. Your people perform exceptionally because you have given them the structure and confidence to do so." His words meant something, coming from an officer with decades of experience across multiple conflicts. But more than validation, they represented documentation. Positive feedback from Allied commanders carried weight in promotion packages, evidence of effectiveness beyond just internal evaluations. The deployment continued. Routine operations mixed with challenging exercises, all of it executed under the additional pressure of being constantly evaluated. Because that's what deployments were: extended job interviews where every decision was scrutinized, every outcome analyzed, every leadership choice documented for future review boards. 3 weeks in, we faced a genuine crisis. One of the host nation's aircraft went down during a training mission, the pilot ejecting safely, but landing in rugged terrain that made immediate recovery difficult. The host nation had limited search and rescue capabilities in that region, and weather was deteriorating rapidly. Their commander requested assistance. I assembled a volunteer crew within 20 minutes, Lieutenant Commander Holt leading, Chief Briggs coordinating ground support, our best pilots manning the aircraft configured for low-altitude operations in adverse conditions. The kind of mission that was technically voluntary but practically mandatory, where declining would mark you as someone who didn't understand what service meant. "Commander," Holt said as they prepared to launch, "this weather is marginal. If it gets worse, we might have to abort." "Your call to make," I said. "I trust your judgment. Get them up there, assess the situation, and make the decision that keeps everyone safe. Mission success isn't worth losing our own people." They launched into deteriorating visibility, following coordinates to the downed pilot's last known position. I monitored from the operations center, tracking their progress, listening to their communication as they navigated through rain and wind that pushed the limits of operational safety. "Eyes on the survivor," Holt reported. "He's mobile but injured. Terrain's rough. We'll need to hover for extraction." "Weather status?" I asked. "Marginal and getting worse. We have maybe a 15-minute window." "Your call, Commander Holt. Execute or abort." Brief silence. "Then, we're executing." Too close to leave him. The next 15 minutes were the longest of the deployment. I listened to their terse communication as they positioned for extraction, as Briggs talked the rescue specialist through the approach, as they pulled the injured pilot aboard and secured him for transport. The entire time, weather conditions worsened, visibility dropping, wind shear threatening the aircraft's stability. "Package secure," Holt finally reported. "Returning to base." They landed in weather that officially grounded all other flights. The aircraft touched down heavily, buffeted by wind, but safely. The rescued pilot was transferred immediately to medical, his injuries serious but treatable. Our crew secured their aircraft and reported to debrief, soaked and exhausted but professionally composed. That was exceptional work, I told them. All of you. That's what service looks like. The host nation commander personally thanked each crew member. The rescued pilot's squadron presented Holt with a unit coin, a gesture of gratitude and respect. But more than recognition, the mission demonstrated something crucial. My squadron didn't just execute well in controlled exercises. They performed under actual pressure, when stakes were real and outcomes mattered. That night, Admiral Greer called via secure line. I heard about the rescue. Hell of a job. Lieutenant Commander Holt led it. She deserves the credit. She executed well because you trained her to and because you trusted her judgment in the moment. That's leadership, Elena. That's exactly what OSIXs do. They build teams capable of executing complex operations independently. It was the right call. It was. And it's going in your promotion package as evidence of command judgment under crisis conditions. He paused. How are you holding up? Fine, sir. Deployment's going well. I'm not asking about the deployment. I'm asking about you. How are you handling the pressure of knowing the promotion board is watching? I considered lying, maintaining the professional facade that said everything was fine. But Greer had earned honesty. It's exhausting, I admit it. Every decision feels like it's under a microscope. Every interaction is potentially evidence for or against promotion. I can't just do my job, I have to do it perfectly, consistently, without any mistakes that could be used to justify passing me over. That's the burden of being first, Greer said quietly. The first woman to reach this level in your community. The first to be seriously considered for O6. You're not just representing yourself. You're proving it's possible. That's unfair, but it's reality. And if I fail? You won't. But if you did, it wouldn't mean the system was right to doubt you. It would just mean one person didn't make it through one promotion board. The path forward would still exist. But it would be harder for the next woman. Possibly. Or possibly she'd learn from what you did right and what you did wrong and have a better approach. That's how progress works, incrementally, imperfectly, but forward. The deployment continued for 3 more weeks. We executed every mission successfully, maintained high readiness standards, integrated seamlessly with Allied forces. By the time we returned home, the squadron had compiled a record of achievement that spoke to both capability and leadership. The Allied commander's evaluation arrived a week after we returned. Commander Vega demonstrated exceptional leadership during this deployment. Her tactical judgment, coordination skills, and ability to build cohesive multinational teams exceeded expectations. She represents the highest standards of professional officership and is strongly recommended for positions of increased responsibility. I read it 3 times, looking for qualifications or reservations. Found none. It was unambiguous, enthusiastic, and exactly the kind of documentation that strengthened promotion packages. That's a strong endorsement, Captain Mills said when I showed him. That'll carry weight with the board. Will it be enough? Combined with everything else? Your performance reviews, the joint exercise, the rescue operation, the squadron's overall improvement, yes. It should be enough. He met my eyes. You've built the case, Elena. Now you just have to wait for the board to see it. 2 months until the board convened. 2 months of continued operations, continued performance, continued documentation of sustained excellence. 2 months of trying not to think about it constantly while being unable to think about anything else. The promotion board met in April. 3 weeks of deliberations, reviewing hundreds of files, evaluating thousands of officers competing for limited slots. The results would be announced in May. Until then, uncertainty, anticipation, the exhausting limbo of knowing your future was being decided, but having no control over the outcome. I kept working. Led the squadron through training exercises. Managed administrative requirements. Maintained standards. Because that's what commanders did, regardless of promotion boards or career anxiety. The mission continued whether I made O6 or not. The results came on a Friday morning in May. Official notification via secure message, formal and brief. Commander Elena Vega, selected for promotion to Captain, 06, U.S. Navy. I read it sitting alone in my office, the words blurring slightly as relief and validation washed over me. 06. Captain. 22 years from Airman Basic to Captain. The first woman in my community to make it. Admiral Greer appeared in my doorway 10 minutes later. Congratulations, Captain Vega. The title sounded strange, unfamiliar, like someone else's name. Thank you, sir. You earned this. Every bit of it. He stepped inside and closed the door. But understand, this doesn't get easier from here. The scrutiny increases. The stakes get higher. The decisions become more consequential. I know. And you'll face the same dynamics you've faced at every level. People who question whether you deserve it. People who assume you're there to check a box. People who need you to prove yourself again. I know that too. Good. He smiled. Because you're ready for it. You've proven you can lead under pressure, build effective teams, execute complex operations, and do it all while navigating barriers that shouldn't exist, but do. That's what makes you qualified for 06. Not in spite of those challenges, because you've overcome them. The promotion ceremony was scheduled for 3 months later, time to coordinate schedules and prepare for the formal transition. In the interim, I continued leading Squadron 7, though everyone now knew I'd be moving to a new assignment commensurate with 06 responsibilities. The pilot's reactions varied. Holt congratulated me immediately, genuine happiness in her voice. You've earned this, Elena. And you're going to be great at it. Reeves approached more formally. Congratulations, Commander, Captain Select. The squadron's going to miss you. You'll get a good commander. Probably better than me. Respectfully, ma'am, I doubt that. He paused. I wanted you to know, working under your command changed how I think about leadership. You showed me that authority comes from competence and consistency, not from fitting a particular image. That's a lesson I won't forget. Even that acknowledgement, that recognition of what I'd proven, felt weighted by the years it had taken to reach this point. But it was something. Progress, however incremental. The weeks leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of transition activities. I briefed my successor, a lieutenant colonel named Hayes who'd come up through different communities, but had a solid reputation. I documented procedures, outlined ongoing challenges, provided context that couldn't be captured in official records. Any advice? Hayes asked during one of our transition meetings. Set clear standards and enforce them consistently, I said. The pilots are good, but they need structure. Give them that, and they'll perform exceptionally. Anything else? I thought about all the things I'd learned, all the mistakes I'd made trying to navigate command as a woman in a male-dominated culture. Don't try to be their friend. Be their commander. The respect will follow if you're consistent, competent, and fair. That sounds like hard-won wisdom. It was. The promotion ceremony took place on a clear morning in August. The squadron assembled in dress uniforms, Admiral Greer presiding, Captain Mills reading the orders. The formal military ritual, unchanged for centuries, marking transitions of rank and responsibility. When Greer pinned the new insignia on my collar, 4 half-inch gold stripes with the 5-point star, I felt the weight of everything it represented. Not just the rank itself, but the path that led here. 22 years of proving, adapting, persevering. 22 years of being told I didn't belong and staying anyway. Captain Elena Vega, Greer said formally, then dropped into something more personal. You've earned this 100 times over. Now go do the job you've always been capable of doing. The reception afterward was subdued but genuine. Pilots and enlisted crew congratulated me, expressed appreciation for the leadership I'd provided, wished me well in the new assignment. Even some of the officers who'd initially resisted my command shook my hand with what appeared to be sincere respect. Commander Vaughn attended, one of the few other women at the ceremony. She pulled me aside briefly. You know what this means, right? You've opened a door. The next woman won't have to fight as hard because you fought first. Or she'll face different battles. Probably. But battles fought on different ground, with better preparation, because you've mapped the terrain. She smiled. Don't underestimate what you've accomplished, Elena. First matters. It always matters. Late that afternoon, after the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, I stood alone on the flight line watching aircraft land from afternoon training exercises. My squadron, no, not mine anymore. Hayes's squadron now. But they'd always carry some piece of what we'd built together, the culture of competence and accountability we'd established. Admiral Greer found me there. Reflecting. Processing, I said. It's been a long road. It has. And it's not over. Oh, 6 brings new responsibilities, new challenges, new opportunities to lead. And new people will question whether I deserve to be there. Possibly. Probably. He stood beside me, both of us watching the aircraft. But you'll handle them the same way you handled Squadron 7. Clear standards. Consistent enforcement. Competent leadership. Eventually, even the skeptics run out of excuses. Eventually isn't the same as immediately. No, but it's progress. And progress is what we build careers on: incremental improvements, small victories, the cumulative weight of sustained excellence. He glanced at me. You've carried more burden than you should have had to, but you've also proven something essential, that the standards apply equally, that competence transcends demographics, that leadership is about effectiveness, not conformity. I wanted to argue, to point out that proving those things shouldn't have been necessary, that the system should have recognized them from the beginning. But Greer already knew that. We both did. What's the new assignment? I asked. Pentagon staff. Joint operations planning. You'll be working multinational coordination at strategic level. He smiled slightly. Basically, everything you did during that joint exercise, but with higher stakes and more politics. Sounds exhausting. It will be. But it's also essential work, and you're qualified to do it. That's why you're going there. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The flight line was quieting, aircraft secured, crews finishing post-flight checks. Another day ending, another phase beginning. Thank you, sir, I said. For the mentorship. For the advocacy. For believing I could do this before I believed it myself. You did the work, Elena. I just made sure the system saw it. He turned to leave, then paused. One last piece of advice. Stop trying to prove you belong. You're an O6 now. You belong by definition. Anyone who suggests otherwise is wrong. Don't waste energy convincing them. Just do the job. He left. I stood there thinking about his words, about the transition ahead, about the 22 years that led to this moment. From airman basic to captain. From proving I deserved to be in the room to commanding the room. From seeking acceptance to simply expecting confidence. The journey hadn't been fair. It hadn't been easy. But it had been mine, shaped by the choices I'd made and the standards I'd maintained. And somehow, against resistance and skepticism and systemic barriers, it had led here. Captain. Oh, 6. First woman in my community to make it. Not because I'd been given anything. Because I'd taken what was always mine, the right to serve, to lead, to command. The right to be judged by performance rather than prejudice. The right to expect the same standards and opportunities as anyone else wearing the uniform. It had taken 22 years to claim those rights fully. 22 years of incremental victories, hard-fought battles, sustained excellence under scrutiny. 22 years of being first, of carrying the burden of representation, of proving what shouldn't need proving. But the door was open now. The path was mapped. The next woman would find it easier because I'd found it hard. That would have to be enough. I walked away from the flight line as darkness settled, the new insignia unfamiliar on my collar, the future uncertain but finally, truly mine to shape. Not as someone seeking permission. Not as someone proving worth. But as a captain who'd earned the rank and the authority and the right to lead. Respect built on silence lasts longer than applause. I'd learned that through years of choosing competence over popularity, standards over acceptance. I'd built that respect incrementally, mission by mission, decision by decision, until even skeptics couldn't deny what the record showed. The work continued. It always would. But now I continued it from different ground, with different responsibilities, carrying the lessons learned from every battle fought to reach this point. First matters. It always matters. And I'd been first. That was legacy enough. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's earning respect the hard way. Now tell me, have you ever been underestimated in a room you were qualified to lead? What finally made people take you seriously? A result, a mentor, a boundary? How do you handle pushback, explain more, or enforce standards? If you were me, what would you have done with Reeves after the apology? What's one leadership standard you refuse to compromise? Drop your answers in the comments. I read everyone.